Hi Wizards, I'm Manuel, also known as Phemo, and today I'll share some tips on bankroll management for tournament poker. In my journey as a poker player, I have met many players, even highly skilled ones, who have gone broke at some point in their careers. Proper bankroll management is one of the most essential skills for any poker player. Together, we'll deepen our understanding of risk, explore practical strategies to manage it, and lay the groundwork for long-term success at the tables. Just as a very brief definition, we can say that bankroll management is the practice of allocating and managing the money that you have set aside for playing poker. And usually you do this with a specific goal in mind. For profitable players, it's most important to sustain long-term play. Being forced to drop out of the game or down in stakes significantly is one of the biggest EV cuts a player can face if he has a positive EV in the game. So we want to avoid that if possible. In the process of playing, we also want to optimize for our earnings and our risk. Why do I not say maximize earnings and minimize risk? Well, the problem is that this is a contradicting challenge. If we would just try to optimize our income, we would usually tend to take on too much risk, go broke too often, or having to move down. And if we just try to minimize our risk, then we would most often play too low or maybe sell too much action, and that way cut our hourly income at too low of a point. So when we try to get better at managing our bankroll, I think it is most important to understand the risk component of bankroll management better. And a great tool to do so are variance calculators, which can help you understand the variance involved in the games that you play and the implications it has on your required bankroll. I quickly want to show you Primedope, which I find to be one of the best poker variance calculators on the market. They have many tools, but you can find the tournaments variance calculator here under poker tools. And at the top of the page, you are supposed to enter the data for the tournaments that you are going to play. I won't go into too much detail about the site today, just for time reasons, but I want to show you the most important features that I think are usable and helpful for players. So a few of the things that you need to enter here are very easy. You can just see them in the lobby. For example, using guaranteed prize pools, will be able to understand how many players are expected to participate in the game, and most companies also provide a payout structure beforehand, so you can see how many places are going to be paid for the guaranteed entrance, for example, but usually it's around 15%. Then you need to enter the buy-in and the rake, and after that, a little bit of guesswork starts. You need to estimate your ROI, and that's very important. We will, throughout this presentation, understand that this is very tough to do based on your own sample, and I will talk about this in a minute a little bit more. One tool that is helpful for online players, for example, is SharkScope, where you can compare other players which you think are similar to your skill level or play a similar schedule, and see how they perform in the games you want to analyze. Then you also need to set a number of how many games you are planning to play or you want this analysis to be valid for. For professional players, this number is probably pretty big, as we are playing for infinity or planning for infinity at least. And this has a few pitfalls as well. I would usually recommend to set this number too high and go with that. I will explain later why that is. Then you also need to set a sample size, how many simulations you want to have to get the results from. Also, you are able to enter a bankroll here, but that's not necessary. Then you see the distribution of the simulations, which I will skip today, but this graph I find very helpful. Out of the 10,000 simulations that I have asked the site to run, these are 20 random examples. And you can see that the worst run lost about $30,000 throughout this 1000 tournaments, and the best run won around 80k. We can also see our EB here in the middle, which was 15k. And when we can see a lot of other samples which are relatively close at the EV. Some are 5k above that, some are 5k below that. It is very crucial to understand that this is basically all the exact same player in different universes, and his results are just influenced by luck or bad luck over this 1000 game stretch. So this is the same player having played the same games with the same ROI and just experiencing different outcomes. Here we can also see again the statistical data over our buy-ins, the ROI and so on, and we can also see the confidence intervals, so statements about how accurate assumptions we can make where our run, in which region, in terms of profit, our run is going to end. But most importantly and most helpful for most players, I think, is this bottom area here, where it's talking about bankroll and risk of ruin. So first of all, we have entered that we played 200 runner tournaments with 9% rake, 15% paid, and we expect we have a 15% ROI. And with the $20,000 bankroll that I entered at the top of the page, we have a risk of going broke in 1.83% of the time in these simulations. In reality, our risk of actually going broke is lower than this, because these simulations just take these tournaments and play them front to finish, and if they go broke, they go broke. Usually a responsible player would react to downswings and move up or down in stakes. So they would usually not play the bankroll until the end and experience this result usually. So this is important to consider when you look at risk of ruin. Another very helpful metric to understand is the probability of loss over the given sample. For example, in this situation with our ROI in this field size, we are expected to lose 16.25% of the time over a 1000 tournament stretch. So you can, for example, use this also to align your expectations with reality over your summer in Vegas or the upcoming online series. Most importantly, though, are these numbers. And here you can see the risk of ruins that the site suggests and the required bankrolls to achieve them. So for example, we entered a $20,000 bankroll, and if we would be happy to achieve a 5% risk of ruin, we only would need around 16K, $15,702. On the other hand, if we are more conservative, we would actually need 22,400 to achieve a 1% risk of ruin. Or if we are more aggressive, 10,500 would be enough to achieve a 15% risk of ruin. And as I said, these numbers are in practice overstated because we will adjust to downswings, move down in stakes, and not go broke as often. But mainly, this is a personal decision on your own risk tolerance and life situation. I will talk about this a little bit later. I would say the standard that I see used most of the time for players is around a 5% risk of ruin. I have prepared a few simulations for you guys, which are all based on 5% risk of ruin. And here in this table, I have summarized the two biggest influence factors on the required bankroll that you will need, which are the field size, how many players are going to participate in a given game, and your edge over the game, your ROI. Of course, the more players participate in the tournament, the more luck is going to be involved. You will have to win more flips, avoid more situations where set up against you, and so on and so forth. Therefore, with more participants, your bankroll needs to be much bigger. At the same time, if your edge over the field is bigger, your ROI is bigger, your bankroll doesn't need to be so big. And if we look at this table, for example, take the column with 100 runners, we can see that at a very low ROI tournament, we would need 345 buy-ins with 3% ROI, for example. That could be a hyper tournament, but it could also be a max late registration for a tournament. And if we would have, for example, 10% ROI, we would only need 173 buy-ins for 5% risk of ruin with 100 MTs. And if we have a pretty big edge over the field and can achieve 25% ROI, we would only need 69 buy-ins, for example. Similarly, when we, for example, look at the 20% ROI row, we can see that in a very, very small field tournament with 50 entries, we can get along with 53 buy-ins. Once there are 200 entries, we already need 148 buy-ins. And if this is a mass field of 2,000 players, we would actually need 710 buy-ins to achieve a 5% risk of ruin. So you can use this kind of logic to develop a bankroll management for yourself. However, it is very crucial that you have good and realistic estimations of your ROI for any given tournament, and that you have an understanding which kind of risk of ruin you want to achieve. I will talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. But first of all, let's think about our tools that we can use to actually manage our risk now that we have understood it better. One tool that MTT players often use is swapping action. That just means exchanging shares of your tournament with other players, oftentimes your friends. That way, every player participates from each other's success and the variance is reduced. For example, we could play a $100 tournament with 20% ROI just by ourselves, and we would need a bankroll that can manage a $100 buy-in. For example, around 15K for a 5% risk of ruin with 200 runners. But I could also swap with two friends, for example, keep half my action for myself and swap 25% with each of my friends, and by that basically reducing the effective buy-in of the tournament down to the biggest piece, my own $50. And that way I would only need half of the bankroll that would be necessary to play it by myself. Usually you should try to find players that are similar skilled to yourself, and if your assumption is correct and they are 100% trustworthy, then you will have no reduction in your ROI. So your income is going to be the same, but your variance will be greatly reduced. Another tool that you can use to manage your risk is selling action. You can either play by yourself and then your EV is just generated by your ROI, which is usually your buy-in multiplied with your ROI is the EV you generate through playing yourself. If you sell action, you generate EV in two different ways. First of all, you will generate a piece of your EV by the ROI you have on your own action. And another piece of the EV is the markup you earn by selling your shares. On the screen you can see formulas how these EVs are calculated, but it's just the EV of any given spot multiplied with the return that you're going to have on the shares that are concerned. For the markup EV, it is relevant how high the markup is. In general, it is considered fair to split the EV of the game 50-50 with your staker. So the markup oftentimes is set at half the expected ROI. So if you had an expectation of 10% ROI in a game, you could set the markup at 5%. And the EV of the markup would then just be the buy-in times the shares that you sell multiplied with the markup. Let's use an example. Maybe you successfully play $100 tournaments with 20% ROI, so that way you generate $20 for each tournament that you play. Maybe, as in our example before, you have a roll of 20K, but this Sunday there's a big main event that you wanted to play for a long time, but you never really considered it because it's so far outside of your bankroll reach. Also, it's a little bit tougher. You only expect to make 10% ROI, so it didn't seem like an attractive option at first glance. But let's think about this a little bit deeper. You could, for example, keep 15% of the action for yourself and generate the 10% ROI that you expect for yourself. So that will be 15% of a $1,000 tournament at 10% ROI would be an EV of $15. Luckily, you found somebody who buys the remaining 85% at a fair markup of 5%, which will yield you $42.50. So in total, you would be able to generate an EV of $57.50 from this single tournament, almost 3 times as high as you usually dollar per tournament. You will also generate a way higher ROI because you now earn $57.50 on your $150 investment, which yields you a 38% ROI instead of the initial 10% in this exact same tournament. Also worth to consider is the fact that of this $57.50, 42.50, the EV of the markup, is actually risk-free. So this is even a more attractive income stream than the EV that you generate through your own play. As we have seen now, besides the field size, your ROI is one of the most important factors in your bankroll management decisions. So as a poker player, it is crucial that you enable your own performance at the tables. In terms of financial management, that means you need to consider your life circumstances and also your natural tendencies. If you are a student living at your parents' place without any fixed bills to pay, then you can take on much more risk than a person that has kids and a family to support. And also, you will know if you are a risk-averse person or not and how it affects you to lose money. Of course, there are many ways to work on this, but in any given moment, you need to respect it to some degree, because if it hinders your performance, it will decrease your ROI and increase the variance in turn by a lot. Working with variance calculators and understanding what you can expect from the games that you play, which kind of downswings are normal to be expected, over how long periods you can potentially lose, and what kind of outcomes you can expect is also a very helpful tool to enable yourself to perform better. In many players, the main reason I see why they tilt is because they do not have a realistic expectation about the runs that they are going to face. Last but not least, you do not want to put financial stress on yourself. On the table, it is crucial that you think about the best strategic decision to play your hand and not about the financial implications of the situation. You don't want to focus on winning today or being afraid of losing today, but instead you want to be immersed in your hand as much as possible and not think about that kind of stuff while you play. So how do we put this in practice? First of all, it is very important that you become aware of the actual EVs of the games that you play. Are you playing a slow structure at the moment? Is it a fast structure? Are you max late ranging? Is it a PKO? Is it a vanilla tournament? Is this a satellite? Every type of tournament has its own expectation, its own ROI, and you need to get a good understanding of the ROIs of your games and your own relative edge to the field that will give you a better understanding of the ROI you can expect in any given situation. Once you've done that, you can take measures on top of it to manage your risk. You can swap with friends, you can get staking, and most importantly, you need to set a bankroll management that is in line with your own life situation and with your own risk aversion. On top of that, I would define thresholds when to move up or down in stakes, so that doesn't concern you during an important series or even within a session. Generally, I would also advise to never risk more than 2% of your bankroll in a single game. Even if it's a very attractive shot, you can also look at the table from before again even with a 25% ROI in a very small field tournament of 50 runners, that was approximately the most aggressive bankroll management for 5% risk of ruin that the simulator suggested. I personally would also recommend never to risk more than 10% of your bankroll in a session. There are always things that can happen during the play. You could get a headache, or the power could go out, or you could just not feel up to it today. And once you move up in stakes, I would actually recommend to move this closer to 5%. So overall, I would recommend you to get a good understanding of the EV of your games and of the risk you want to take on. And one of the most important tools that you actually have is to improve your game, to get a bigger win rate, to get a bigger edge over your competition, increase your ROI, and by that also reduce the variance you're going to experience and reduce the bankroll that is required to play any given stakes. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you took something away from today. If you have any further questions, join our socials like Discord, or check out the further resources we have on bankroll management. There are many articles on GTO Wizard and other instructional videos. Thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.